Smarties, today we are continuing our 4-part series about accommodations. Last week in episode 347, we chatted about what accommodations are, why they're important, and common misconceptions about them. Today we dig into why some accommodations don't work as intended, despite the best of intentions. And for the next 2 weeks, we are going to dig into our favorite accommodations and why we enjoy them. In the next 2 subsequent episodes, we are going to dig into our favorite accommodations and why they are effective. If these episodes are helpful and or you've been a longtime Smartie, one of the easiest ways that you can support the work that we do here at Learn Smarter Podcast is to leave us a review. Obviously, we love reading them and we love when they're 5 stars. Thanks for doing it, Smarties. Let's dig in.
You want to learn faster, but sometimes working harder is just not the answer. You have to learn smarter. The Educational Therapy Podcast.
Hi, Smarties. Welcome to episode 348 of Learn Smarter, the Educational Therapy Podcast. I'm Stephanie Pitts.
And I'm Rachel Kapp.
And Rachel is making me laugh a lot today, so I pre-apologize for the fact that I can't keep a straight face. So, anyway, Rach,
I have a good story.
Yeah, we're going to talk about why some accommodations don't help. But in the meantime, let's talk about some accommodations that didn't help you.
So last week, I did a professional development at an independent school here in Los Angeles. This is something that Steph and I are both doing very frequently. We're doing a lot of speaking and a lot of professional developments, and a lot of speaking for parents and communities. So if you're interested, definitely reach out to us, Rachel and Steph at LearnSmarterPodcast.com. But this one I was doing solo, and I was having a great conversation. It was more of an informal vibe. And I walk out, and I'm still chatting away. I get in my car. I drive the hour and a half home. I get to my front door. I go to grab my backpack, and I thought, this feels really light. And I instantly knew I had just given a talk on executive functioning skills and I had left my laptop.
Oops.
It was an oops. I immediately pull out my phone and email my contact there. And I said, I can't even believe I'm writing this email. Yes, I left my laptop. If you guys could just hold on to it for me, I'll come get it. And yes, the irony of this is not lost on me, given the context of my talk. And she just emailed me back like a big laughing emoji. And I do have my laptop now. Everything's fine, everyone. But it was just such an example of multitasking because I was chit-chatting and putting things away. And I just didn't do the final step. So things are not done until the final step, everybody.
Yeah, you didn't turn in that homework. You didn't put it in the backpack, so it didn't make it to where it needed to go.
Correct. But I know that our audience and our clients love it when we have an executive functioning failure.
100%.
I'm sharing the story to share the humanity of all of us, as I remind myself.
The text message was, Steph, you're not going to believe this. All is fine in the world now.
All is well that ends well, everyone. The important part is the recovery.
Oh, absolutely.
And I highly recommend making a joke in the recovery. It helps.
That's very much you. And I very much laugh every time.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about why some accommodations may not work as intended.
I want to preface this with some accommodations work for some kids and some don't work for other kids. And it can be the school, it can be the teacher, it could be the class, it could be the time of day. There's so many different things. So let's talk about how they could be mismatched to what the student actually needs. So a kid might get accommodations for taking a test in another room, let's say. But let's say that other room is really noisy and there's a lot of things happening and they're getting very distracted. And so that other room is not actually helping, even though it's intended to help.
Right.
So now we need to have something else to put on top of it if there's no other situation to help them. There's no other room for them to go to. Or maybe, the student hasn't quite figured out that that's the problem and don't know to ask for another room or to go into a principal's office or something and take the test. Or do they need something on top of it? Like they might need noise canceling headphones because they can't focus because there's so much noise everywhere.
Another example of this is the frequent accommodation of extended time. Well, there are examples of this being wonderful. So if you have a learner who's anxious about time, extended time can give peace of mind. But if you have learners that aren't thorough, extended time isn't going to solve the problem of them sort of moving too quickly. The same sort of thing, and you've heard us talk about this, is the idea of flexible deadlines and getting extensions and stuff. For learners who struggle with executive functioning skills challenges, moving the goalpost actually doesn't help. What it does is it just creates a pileup of work. And so that's not an accommodation, even if it's offered. But I always tell families, take everything that's offered, and then we can use what we need as we need it.
Absolutely.
So then the next reason, this could be an overwhelming conversation for some families who are listening to this episode, and they're wondering why the accommodations that are currently set up for their learner aren't working. This is highly nuanced.
It is.
So you may hear sort of something that we say and think, oh, maybe that's it. And then hear the next thing that we say and think, oh, maybe that's it. This is why it can be very, very helpful to have an expert like one of us or one of our team members join the team, join the situation to sort of help you navigate through all of this. It's very hard for parents to be experts on accommodations and learning supports if that's not what they know.
And because there's so many different factors going on just constantly. Like I said, it could be that they need one accommodation in the morning and one accommodation in the afternoon.
Yes. So another reason it may not work is lack of proper implementation or consistent implementation. So this could be something as simple as you want your learner to have preferential seating in the classroom and sit closer to the front, but the classroom isn't set up that way. Or a teacher doesn't implement it because they didn't hear and they didn't get the memo. It happens, guys. People are human. And so that's another reason why an accommodation may not work. Steph, this next one goes back to what you were saying as well.
The important thing, too, about it is there's insufficient monitoring or adjustment, right? So going back to the proper implementation, let's say your kid has preferential seating, and let's say there's 30 kids in the class, but 26 kids have preferential seating. What do? So sometimes some kids need it more than your kid. And unfortunately, that makes it so that your kid doesn't get the first spot, which they might need, but they might not be a behavioral issue, and therefore they don't get that seat. So I think it's just as important to talk about the follow-up, right? What accommodations are working? What are not working?
And how will we know? How will we know if this accommodation is working? What are we looking for in terms of success? How will we know if it's not working? And when are we regrouping on this?
Right, exactly. And who's regrouping about it, right? Is there check-in with the teachers? Or is there check-in with the teachers? Is there check-in with the student? Depending on their age, right? This is also something that we feel is really important to help the learners learn who they are and what they need, is that they have time to sit back and reflect and say what's working and what's not working, because that is just as important to helping them understand what they need to ask for when they need it. The other thing that I wanted to add about the follow-up is that maybe there is something that is needed, like speech to text. Maybe speech to text isn't enough for a student with dyslexia because it's not catching the commas and it might be misspelling things, and the student doesn't know how to change the words if they don't know that it's spelled incorrectly. So sometimes they might need more advanced tools like Grammarly or things like that to help them actually get to the goal that the original accommodation was meant to do. So I guess I'm saying sometimes there needs to be multiple tools to help them reach the goal.
The next reason is that the teacher or the parent or the student may misunderstand how the accommodation is supposed to help. And this can go back to our earlier conversation last week in episode 347 about the trickiness of accommodations. As a reminder, accommodations are supposed to level the playing field. It's not giving anybody an unfair advantage. And it's also not going to become a crutch. I think that's a big concern.
I think it is, because a lot of times when I'm talking to parents, one of the conversations that comes up is the parents want the kids to learn grit and have grit. And the problem, unfortunately, a lot of times, is that they do have grit, and we're asking them to have more than everybody else.
And having grit means we have to be okay with them being uncomfortable.
Right.
As a reminder.
Yeah, fair enough.
Cannot create grit without living in that uncomfortable moment with them.
Absolutely.
The next one is like real logistical barriers. So things like what you were talking about, there may not be a room to take a test in silence, or the school may lack the funds.
Yeah.
A child who has diabetes might need to get injections to regulate their blood sugar. And that's an accommodation, right? Because remember, not all accommodations are about the learning. This is
medical. Yep.
A medical reason. But if the school doesn't have a full-time nurse on staff, that's not going to be something that's realistic necessarily. Obviously, it's something that's going to have to get worked out.
Yep. And where and when and how and all of those things.
Or if they have one-on-one services and the practitioner is having a difficult time aligning their schedule with the classroom schedule. Those are all logistical barriers to implementation.
Yeah. Or a one-on-one aide is actually out sick.
Exactly. And they have to make up that time for everybody on their caseload.
Yeah. What happens if that goes on and just, there's going to be days that work and days that don't? Okay, then let's go to this last one. And I think this is an important part of the conversation. And this is something that we really strive to help kids understand. There is stigma and social pressure. There's stigma around, oh, you need that. There's social pressure of, oh, you only got that grade, those kinds of things. And there's a lot of kids whose self-esteem is extremely impacted. They're very self-conscious, and they don't need special treatment, as a lot of them call it. And they don't want their peers to know.
To be different.
Yeah, they don't want to be different, especially in middle school.
Yeah.
So it can discourage them from using accommodations because they don't want to be different. This is a really important part of the bigger picture of life. And also a really big part in educational therapy is looking at the whole child and looking at the whole picture, or the whole learner, or the whole student, whatever age, to help them understand who they are and what they need. And how can we do that? We all have things. And how can we do that in a way that makes them feel comfortable, but still get their needs met? And sometimes that might be little extra things, like instead of the teacher asking, do you understand? The teacher touches the student on the shoulder. And that's the signal, do you understand? Yes or no?
Or taps the table if they're not allowed to touch the learner.
That might be happening too. But there's all kinds of things. So I think helping everybody understand what the student needs. Because, okay, a student might feel embarrassed to go to a different room to take a test. But if they get called to the office, then that could be something that could be changed a little bit until the kid really understands that that's helpful and then starts to want it on their own. Right? Like there can be little tweaks that are made to help them if it's that first step that's the problem. Talking to teachers is a huge one. A lot of kids don't want to talk to teachers. So what can you do instead? You can email them and have them talk to you. Things like that about stigma and social pressure. What can we look at and how can we look at it a little differently to help them still get what they need?
Be sure to tune in next week as we talk about some of our favorite accommodations and why they are effective. Have a great week, Smarties.
Have a great week.